I've been walking the streets for the last 7 years. When we first moved here, we actually lived in the village, in Greenwich Village. She told me, yes, you can walk on the street, you know. She says, you will be able to walk here, but I would be walking on tents like that, waiting for somebody to say something or jump on me and like that. I mean, people will come up and ask for autographs or say hi, but they won't bug you, you know.
The murder of John Lennon in New York last night is full of ironies. He just started a successful musical comeback after years of withdrawal. In his last recorded interview, he said what he liked about New York was the security, even the autograph hunters who only wanted a signature and then left him alone. And the man charged with Lennon's murder was an autograph hunter, Mark David Chapman, who, it's alleged in court this afternoon, came from Hawaii specially to kill Lennon. Yet, according to Chapman's lawyer, he admired Lennon. He liked him very much. And why did he do it? Well, ironically again, when Chapman came face to face with a man he admired, a man known for his love of playing with words, there was no communication between them. I understood his words, said Chapman. I didn't understand his meaning. Well, no one can understand the meaning of Lennon's death, particularly the citizens of his adopted city, New York, from where Peter Hobday reports. He begins outside the luxurious Dakota apartment block where Lennon was shot.
It's now 14 hours since John Lennon was shot here at the entrance to the Dakota building on West 72nd Street in the center of New York. And in those 14 hours, there's been a crowd here standing in more or less silent vigil. And the flowers have been piling up at the gate.
He's not dead. They're just saying that.
You know, the doctor just announced it?
Yes, but I don't care. They're just saying that to get people to leave. He's not dead. John Lennon can't be dead.
Mr. Lennon was struck several times. We're not positive at this time as to how many times he was struck. He went up the stairs. There are 5 steps that lead up into the watchman's area of the Dakota. He went through that area into an office inside where he collapsed to the floor.
John Lennon was a New Yorker by adoption, and as soon as the word of the shooting was out, carried by radio stations across the city, his admirers started to gather. Their reaction was one of disbelief.
The body has been taken over town across to East 30th Street to the medical examiner's office. And the medical examiner's office told the BBC this morning that 4 bullets were in fact shot into John Lennon, one of which went through the body, one of which remained. It's thought that he died almost instantly. Ringo Starr arrived in the city this morning, went to the Dakota, and since then has refused to make any comment whatsoever. As for the suspect, who remained here after he had shot Mr. Lennon, he's now, at the present moment, awaiting arraignment and to be charged on first-degree murder. Nobody knows why he came to New York in the first place, or indeed what the motive was in what seems to be a totally senseless killing. Ringo Starr had chartered a private plane from Bermuda, and he got into the Dakota building through the back to avoid that large crowd out front, which had been filling up both sides of the street, growing steadily in numbers since first light. He stayed altogether about 2 hours. The shooting happened just before 11 o'clock on Monday night, as the Lennons came back from their recording studios.
So John and Yoko get out of the other limousine. They walked into the gate, and let me take your time. And then I heard 4 or 5 shots. They were air shattering. I heard Yoko, and I heard a woman screaming. It was Yoko. She was screaming, "Help me."
Later, the local police station, the 20th Precinct, released the official version.
Has been about the Dakota for the last several days. He was there on Saturday asking about Mr. Lennon. He was there on Sunday asking about Mr. Lennon. And he was there again this afternoon when Mr. Lennon and his wife left for a recording session. He was able to obtain an autograph on an album from Mr. Lennon as he left for the recording studio where he was going. He remained at that location all evening waiting for Mr. Lennon to come back. Sometime shortly before 11 o'clock, John Lennon and his wife arrived back at the Dakota in a limousine. They parked the limousine on the curb right outside the Dakota. There is a driveway into which they might have gone, but on this occasion did not. They got out of the car, out of the limousine, and walked into the archway area of the Dakota. To the right, as you walk in the archway area, is kind of a vestibule, which has a doorway, a glass doorway. This individual, Mr. Chapman, came up behind him and called to him, Mr. Lennon, as he arrived at that doorway. And then in a combat stance, he emptied the Charter Arms .38 caliber gun that he had with him and shot John Lennon.
The body was then taken to the Roosevelt Memorial Hospital a few blocks away from the Dakota. John Lennon was dead on arrival. This morning, the body was taken off to the city morgue, and Patrolman Tony Palmer was with the corpse.
I arrived at the hospital. I was informed that it was John Lennon inside, and I had Yoko Ono with me, and then I realized it was her. As a matter of fact, I had given her a dime to make a phone call. She wanted to call friends, you know. And at that time, I just thought it was, you know, I was just trying to be...
What have you been feeling since then?
Well, you know, I feel bad about it. You know, I was a Beatles fan when I grew up in that age.
It froze me. I came last night for basically my own reasons to show support for whatever. It wasn't really morbid curiosity. And this morning, I think I was here curious to see how everyone else reacted.
It symbolized hope, a new life, a new beginning. He was a great man.
John was shot on December 8th of 1980. Do you remember where you were that day?
The Friday prior is when I was, as a matter of fact, I was working with the Four Tops. I was doing their album at this time. And I was going home. I was exhausted. I was working at RCA Studios, which was on 44th Street on the corner of 6th Avenue. The record plant was on 44th Street between 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue. So it was like a block, 2 blocks away. So I was going home, and I saw Jack Douglas. He was doing Double Fantasy. They were doing the second single. And I went up to him and I said, "Hey man, what's going on?" We started talking, yada, yada, yada. I said, he says to me, "John's been asking about you. He said, why don't you come up?" I said, Jack, tell John I'm real tired, man. I mean, I'd love to come and see him, but I'm exhausted. If I get up there, we're going to be partying, having a good time, and I got to be back at, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I said, no, I had to be back. I said, I want to get home. So I said, are you going to be here on Monday? He says, yeah, we'll be here Monday. We're working Monday night at the same time. I said, okay, look, I said, every night for the past 2 weeks, the Tops usually stop around 7:30. We go out for dinner. I'll come down. He said, okay, I'll tell John. So Monday comes, we're working with the Tops, 7:30. I tell the producer, I have to go. I'm going to have dinner. He says, well, they want to work through 7:30 tonight. I said, you're kidding me. He said, well, the Tops are going to London on Thursday for a show. They want to have all the vocals out of the way, so in case they blow their vocal cords, they don't want to come back and have to waste time. I said, okay. So I said, no big deal. He waited this long. I can wait a couple of hours. I'll go see him at 11 o'clock. I figured I'll see him before he leaves. So we finished about, I guess it was 10 to 11. And I was running outside, breaking the mics down. And the producer comes out, and he's white as a ghost. And I said, what's the matter? He says, my wife just called me and told me that John's been shot. And I said, get out. I said, that's terrible. I said, because I'm going to see him. That's terrible of you to say. I said, I'm not working anymore. He said, no, I'm serious. I said, come on. He said, oh. So the phone rings. He runs back inside. So now I'm still taking the mics and winding the wires up. And he comes out, and he's like, it's like he's worse than he was before. And I said, what's the matter? I said, you look terrible. What happened? He said, John's dead. I said, Dave, it's a horrible thing to say. He says, no, I'm serious. I said, all right, yeah, John's dead. So I said, okay, let me go inside and make a phone call. So I go inside and I call May Pang at her apartment. And I call her up and she's screaming. Did you hear what happened? I said, this is true? She said, yes. And I said, she said, I can't talk to you now. I said, I'll talk to you later. So I just got up in a complete stupor. And I walked out of the studio. I didn't shut the electricity off. I didn't take the tape off the machines. I didn't shut anything down. The lights were on. I just walked out. When I got home, my wife was up, and she heard the news. And I think for the next 6 hours, all we did was cry. I felt like they shot my brother. I mean, it's like somebody punched me in the gut. I mean, took my breath away. The next day, I was like, I called May. I said, what's going on? She said, I'm going to, come over here. So I went over to her house, and me and, I should say May and I and this other person, Arlene, the three of us just sat around and hugged each other and cried because this was like a family. We were like a family. I mean, John had worked with us for 3 years. It was like family to us. And the only thing that I hold, if any kind of regret, the only thing I can hold against Yoko was the fact that she didn't let any of his people that worked with John see him. That she had him cremated the following day. There was no wake. We never got to see him. We don't know what happened. We don't know where the ashes are. Not that, I'm not going to go to his urn and kneel in front of it, but just to say, goodbye to a dear friend.
You look into my eyes like a window. Wherever it takes me, I will know. In spite of all the danger, I will go. Don't know just what I'll find, what I'll see there. As long as you're with me, I don't care. 'Cause in spite of all the danger, I'll be there. You're the only one that keeps me satisfied. Oh, oh, oh. You're the only love that makes the world seem right. The world seem right. Oh, yeah.
John Lennon's death has shocked people all over the world. Yugoslav radio played many of his records today. East German radio paid tribute to him for his anti-war work. His fellow Beatles were in a state of shock. Paul McCartney said today that he can't yet take in the news. He said, John was a great guy who'll be missed by the whole world. George Harrison was tonight said to be stunned. He said that after all we went through together, I had and still have great respect for him. All over the pop world, the reaction was one of complete despair. Mick Jagger, speaking from Paris, claimed that he was shattered by the news.
Under heavy guard, Mark Chapman was brought from prison to the State Supreme Court in Manhattan to hear the judge's sentence. Chapman showed no emotion whatsoever when the sentence of 20 years to life was handed out. But before that moment, there was to be detailed evidence about his state of mind. Outside the courtroom were many Lennon fans. Security measures were strict when they filed in, as there have been many threats against Chapman's life since the murder. Today, Chapman's lawyer, who originally had wanted him to plead not guilty because of insanity, unsuccessfully applied to have the guilty plea reversed. Then, a leading psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Schwartz, was called to the witness box, and he described Chapman as a paranoid schizophrenic.
I think he's basically a schizophrenic who has, to a certain extent, lived in a fantasy world for many years, who has also suffered from severe depressions, and who committed this awful act for many reasons, not the least of which was, without him quite being aware of it, an attempt to cope with his feelings of depression and suicide.
In his evidence, Dr. Schwartz said that at first Chapman had idolized the pop star and had started to believe he was John Lennon. But realizing he was losing his own identity, Chapman's adulation turned to hate. Lennon became an evil person he had to kill. Chapman, a loner who lived in a bizarre world of make-believe, claimed he'd received orders to kill Lennon from Satan and had defied God to do so.
She was described as a very private person, uncomfortable with the publicity, unwilling to accept any money for her story or profit from the tragedy. She referred most questions to attorney Brooke Hart, but when she spoke, her voice was quiet and firm.
I just want to say that I'm just still, again, very concerned about Mark, and I'm just very, very sorry that this had to happen to Yoko Ono and her family, and that her husband had to die.
Gloria did not do anything or participate in any way in this trip in a knowing way or in a way in which she did consciously in any way lend any support to Mark's efforts.
Hart seemed to endorse the theory that Chapman had a confused personality, perhaps thinking he was John Lennon, and the man he is accused of shooting was an imposter. Mrs. Chapman talked of her religious beliefs and how that will guide her.
I'm a Christian, and I believe that forgiveness is one of the greatest things. I've always felt that I'm a very forgiving person. And I have not yet not forgiven Mark for anything he's done.
And if she could give him a message?
Well, tell him I love you.
John Lennon fell into a very deep hole, a hole that was so deep inside of me that I thought by killing him I would acquire his fame.
It was his lifelong dream to be famous. Surely Mark David Chapman, a chronic nobody, was in the thoughts of many of the 100,000 people who gathered in Central Park to mourn John Lennon. Chapman's arrest made news around the globe. He was one of the most hated men in the world.
I liked John Lennon at one point myself, before this thought of murder came inside myself. I would be very angry at anybody who did anything to him, so I can understand their anger. It's very difficult being who I am. I have to face what I've done every day. That's not easy. And I imagine this will go on until I die. I can face it now. I can look at what I did from a rational perspective, from even another perspective of, you know, kind of placing myself back at that time and trying to analyze what I did, which I'm still undergoing, you know. I used to love the Beatles and go along with anything they said. Their idealism meant a lot to me. And I saw that at that time as a sellout. I was just letting loose this tirade of, you know, just an explosive anger at John Lennon.
Rich man, rich
Yes.
apartment.
Yes, that's it.
Mark bought a Charter Arms .38 pistol and a plane ticket for New York City. When he checked out of his job as a maintenance man for the last time, he signed John Lennon.
I turned to Satan because I knew I wouldn't have the strength to kill a man on my own. So I went through what I thought was an appropriate satanic ritual, and took all my clothes off and chanted and screamed and howled. And
Before the murder?
yes, I asked Satan to give me the power to kill John Lennon.
Bring me back to December 8th, 1980.
It was a very long day. It was overcast. And I had been standing outside the Dakota for many hours, talking to the people that were there. All of a sudden, John Lennon comes out. I had bought Double Fantasy.
You bought this album that was very popular at that time.
Yes, it was. Paul kind of pushed me forward and said, there he is. So I went up to him and I stuck out my album. And I found the words and I said,
John, would you sign my album?
Where did he sign?
Right on Yoko's neck.
What did you write?
He wrote John Lennon, 1980. After it got dark, the hours went by, 2, 3, 4 hours, 5 hours. I had the gun in my pocket, and I had a copy of The Catcher in the Rye over the gun. So I'm sitting there. It's dark, and this limo pulls up. The driver didn't get out, but Yoko opened the back door. She didn't wait for John. She walked past me, and John got out, and he came up the pathway, and he looked at me also. I heard this voice, not an audible voice, but an inaudible voice saying,